Over the course of the last summer, I became really excited about the prospects for using blogging as a vehicle for growing my YouTube channel. As more and more new AI tools were coming onto the market, I was starting to think about just how easier it could be to turn a YouTube video into a blog post or vice versa. And then, as someone who had practiced the craft of writing for 30 years, I would have the ability to be super efficient in editing that regenerated AI text into something that would sound a lot like it was written in my own voice. This regenerated content then could be distributed on my podcast website through platforms such as Medium or on social media sites such as Instagram and the X app. On sites like Medium, you can even embed your YouTube video right into your blog post to get extra views. Not only that, blog posts offered the opportunity to embed affiliate links, which would then take people over to your digital products or other offers. It was like the perfect setup for organic content marketing. And just right then, I had the opportunity to speak with Amanda Hand, who is an expert in content marketing and my guest for today's episode. We talked about the whole process of how to get started with blogging, including the right way to use artificial intelligence, the process for developing successful content, how to promote your content, and building a relationship with your audience. I think there's a lot there that will be helpful not just for bloggers and YouTubers, but for content creators of all types. I believe this is a strategy that has a lot of potential, but there are a couple of important caveats that come with it that I want to share with you at the end. So stick around for that and let's get into it. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I know a lot of content creators, if they have a website, they often attach a blog to it. But it's one thing to start uploading blog posts, and it's another thing to create a successful blog. So, as a content marketing expert and content creator, I'm really interested in gaining some of your insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about them. I think that the most important part of getting started when you're a new blogger is really digging deep into what you love to talk about the most and what you're
Right.
an expert at. And then from there, think about what do people want to know or how
Hmm.
can I add value to
Right.
people's lives on this topic. And that's where everything begins. That's where you've got to start, I think, to drive any success to a blog.
Yeah, that kind of leads into my first question, which is about ideas. And there's so many artificial intelligence tools and other things that have come out recently that help generate ideas. I used to think when I started that the challenge would be like, how would I keep coming up with ideas for content? In some ways, it's gotten easier because of these tools, but it's also challenging because you need to think about, well, which ideas am I going to pursue? And so, how do you recommend people think about that in terms of, they've got this whole list of ideas around their niche or around what they're interested in? Which are the ones that we should produce, given limited time and knowing you can't pursue all of them?
That's a really good question. I think that it is all going to come back to who your audience is and what it is that
Mhm.
they need. And you have to really be thinking about, okay, this is my audience. These people
Right.
are coming to my blog or to me for something that's going to add
Mhm.
value. What topics do I need to be discussing and what value does my perspective add? And
Mhm.
if you're, you know, talking about something that's been discussed tens of thousands of times by other
Yeah.
bloggers, you really have to be able to think, okay, should I be talking about this still?
Mhm.
And if the answer is yes, or I really feel like I need to be talking about this, how
Mhm.
can I do so in a way that's going to help pivot from what's already out there so that there's
Right.
some uniqueness to it? But I think it really is always going to come down to the user, what's
Mhm.
good for them. And I think that AI is great at helping assist you in coming up with ideas,
Right.
but you're always going to have to self edit those ideas. You're always going to have to go a little bit deeper than the AI does to make sure that you're really adding that value to the readership. Because if somebody is asking the AI for topic ideas around your
Mhm.
niche, chances are that is being spit out to somebody else,
Right.
and you've really got to be able to make it your own to differentiate yourself.
For sure. And maybe that's one of the reasons we see like a lot of commonality around topics. Maybe partly a function of all these keyword research tools and AI, and also just because there is kind of a list of standard topics. But I think you're right. It's about how do you approach it? What's your unique experience in dealing with that challenge? Or do you have a solution that's a little different than everybody else's that can help, as you say, differentiate yourself? So having come to the ideas and maybe we've narrowed it down a bit kind of based on what our experience is and what the audience is looking for, what are some of the other key things that we can do to turn that nugget of an idea into a successful piece of content?
The biggest thing I think that a lot of content writers overlook is the opportunity for focus group type marketing. Ask your
Right.
audience what they want. Really,
Yeah.
really talk to them and don't be afraid to get detailed with them.
Hmm.
Or if, let's say, it's not reasonable for you and maybe you don't have a big email list yet, you're just getting started,
Hmm.
you know, your list is really, really small. Ask people who are also interested in this topic what some things
Right.
about this, what are some confusing things or some things that they're not totally sure of or
Hmm.
maybe haven't thought about. Ask them what those are and then create content that is for that user. I think that that's really helped, especially in places like the travel industry, which
Hmm.
is where I've spent most of my time because thousands of destination bloggers talk about the Bahamas. But then you go deeper into that niche and you realize that there's even like sub niches of that niche where people
Yeah.
are asking questions or talking about things like shark diving and shark
Hmm.
conservation. And you can really get into those types of details and start to ask
Right.
readers and people who are interested in shark conservation
Hmm.
and want to go to the Bahamas. What are some things that they've always wanted to know, and how can you
Right.
bring that to the content so that they're interested in it, but they're also finding it helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. You can keep narrowing down the topics to come to those points that are actually, like you say, differentiated from what's out there. And that's also a good search engine strategy because those topics will be less competitive. And that's definitely a challenge I've run into in YouTube in some cases where you try to do a very general topic. This may be important for your audience, but it's so competitive, you just can't get a lot of views on your video because there's thousands of other videos out there on that very same topic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's where building that email list comes in too,
Mm.
because I know there maybe 10 different people are talking about the same thing, but they're not using the same tone of voice. They're
Right.
not writing from the same lived experience. And the person who I'm going to read is the person who most aligns with what my inner voice sounds like or what,
Right.
I enjoy reading that I find entertaining and that makes me
Hmm.
smile or makes me laugh. So I think sometimes these more general topics, you do want to talk about them because you have these niche pieces that you're
Hmm.
covering, but it's really important to make sure to talk about it at a high level from your perspective, just
Right.
so that you're posturing yourself as an expert, for example.
Hmm.
Sending out to your email list and getting them to view this content is going to be a lot easier. It's going to start to get that
Right.
viewership up, and then you'll start to get traction in other
Yeah.
places as a result. So that's always a
Yeah.
strategy to include as well.
Yeah, definitely. I did a show earlier about creating a lead magnet to start building an email list. And I do think it's so important for creators so you have that channel of communication. And then you mentioned about, other ways to try and understand what your audience is interested in. And one of the ways I heard that can be effective with that is also just looking at comments on not just your own content, other people's content, and really kind of mining those for additional insights and what opportunities there are to connect with a specific audience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that comments are a great place to do some mining. People also ask, and Google is
Yeah.
a great resource to help. You can go down the rabbit hole for hours with in the SERPs with those things. There's times where I'm like, wait, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And it will come from the people also ask session of
Right.
Google. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. But that's another really great opportunity. And then
Hmm.
you have tools like SEMrush and
Right.
Ahrefs and things like that that can help lead you to think of content pieces and topics that you can
Right.
that you
All kind of related to the same thing. I think that's so important to try and cluster it around, some kind of specific topic or niche, as you said. Although it is kind of tempting, I think, for creators to go more wide. And what's your thought about that in terms of like how narrow or wide your niche should be? Because, in some ways there's an argument for a broad niche that would have potentially broad appeal. And then on the other hand, though, sometimes you lose the clarity of what you're actually about. So how do you strike that balance?
I guess it's all about your goals.
Mm-hmm.
Really, at the end of the day, what are your goals? As someone who's worked in content creation for mainly for profit for businesses
Mm-hmm.
within both the travel space and home service industries, my goal is to always get the phones ringing,
Right.
right? So that's the metric that I have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody who's a content creator that's, looking to get brand partnerships and other kinds of things, your goals are going to look a little bit different.
Right.
So if you're a lifestyle blogger, for example, you might need to cast a wider net.
Mm.
But I guess clarity is really going to come around how you tie everything together in that
Right.
case, making sure that you have consistent tone, consistent voice, that there's a
Mm.
personality that no one else is bringing to the table that's unique to you, or as unique as it can get. Like,
Yeah.
I believe that we're both always one of a kind and also very
Right.
similar to one another. So it's always that balance to strike as well. But yeah, I think that if you're thinking about casting a really wide net because you're
Mm-hmm.
looking to get a diverse portfolio of brand partnerships,
Mm-hmm.
then you really need to think about how to make sure that your tone and your messaging is consistent,
Right.
that when someone sees a video, they know who you are, even if they
Mm-hmm.
don't know your name, they've recognized
Right.
your face, or if they're reading a blog, they can almost kind of tell that where this blog is coming
Mm-hmm.
from. That's I guess my biggest suggestion for anyone who's looking to cast a wide net.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, I'm a proponent of focusing on niche
Okay.
because I keep going back to the travel space because I think it's always the most clear example. And I think for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of content creators, travel is very appealing.
Yeah.
It's a very appealing industry to create content within. But for travel,
Right.
time and time again, the travel advisors that I've worked with over the years that are the most successful
Mm-hmm.
provide really niche experiences. The content that they create around those experiences
Mm-hmm.
is tailored to those experiences, to helping
Right.
spread awareness about what those experiences bring at those specific destinations. And it's and having that niche, trying to think of a successful travel advisor that really does a really good job of
Mm-hmm.
creating a lot of content in the luxury travel space specifically, focuses on telling stories
Mm.
wherever you go.
Right.
So she's not sending people to the same destination over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, but the way that she's packaging her tours is
Mm.
based around storytelling,
Right.
and bringing that into its own niche opens up, literary tours,
Mm-hmm.
historical tours, but all through the lens of a storyteller, where your
Yeah.
itinerary is a part of your story. And people really love that. They love the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to be their own content creator on vacation, even though they've got to go back to a 9 to 5. So that niche is really kind of growing now because people are
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, like I love that this person is setting me up to tell my story as I'm
Right.
traveling, to document it and to kind of be a content creator, even though that's not
Mm-hmm.
what I do or how I typically travel. So big proponent of the niche in that way. And I think that with
Right.
writing, it should be just as focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you think there is a step that people tend to rush over when they're creating content?
You hear it all the time, but like you've got to be able to kill your babies. I think
Yeah.
that not enough content creators are willing to strike down their own ideas. So the amount of content that I'll look at and I'll say like you did not self-edit that, and if you
Right.
did, you're not being honest with yourself, and I'll send it back. So for me, I think the one that I see the most is that people aren't willing to detach themselves from their original ideas early
Mm-hmm.
enough. And I think people do not self-edit harshly enough. I think
Yeah.
they go quickly over that process because
Right.
it is really exciting to
Yeah.
write and to create. And it's also really vulnerable. So I think when you do get into that flow and you're really hyped and you're like, yes, I'm so excited about this. I've been working on it for 3 weeks. It's going to be a
Yeah.
great success. You're in the moment and you almost overlook the editing process because it took you so long to get it where it
Right.
is, that you sometimes are like not self editing as strictly as you should be or as harshly as you
Yeah.
should be.
I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. I think we've all had those sections where we think they're very clever, but you show them to other people, and it's like, well, it's such an inside joke. I don't get it, or I don't see what that has to do with the rest of the blog. But
Mm.
cutting those can be hard because, like you say, you get personally attached to them.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest key is just self-awareness.
Hmm.
What are the things that people tend to really value in you?
Right,
And then what are the things that sometimes people maybe don't fully appreciate that you might have more
right.
appreciation for? Just having self-awareness around that and
Yeah,
then being able to see that in your content creation process, I think is really helpful.
yeah, that's a good point. Like being thinking about what resonates with the audience. What are you good at?
Mm.
And sure, branch out occasionally, but understand that when you're branching out, you're experimenting, and you can't get too attached to what the results of that are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. So let's say we've got our post done. We've written it out and tailored it to the audience, and then we hit publish, and it's crickets at first because it's a new blog site, or you've got a relatively new social profile. What do we do next? How do we get people and traffic to our site?
So the first thing that I can suggest is just making sure that it's indexed. That is very technical, very basic, but a lot of
Yeah.
people maybe don't know about it or overlook it.
Right.
So start there.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that your technical SEO is good.
Mm-hmm.
So, you make sure that you know how to properly write
Right.
the alt text for the images. Make sure that your meta description and your title tags are good.
Right.
Technical SEO out of the way. Okay, great. Now you really should have an email list at this point.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting ready to write a blog, you should already be starting to collect emails. I think honestly, you can start before you even publish your first blog. There's
Mm-hmm.
ways to do it. And then self promote, like
Mm-hmm.
shamelessly, but also realistically self
All
promote.
right.
No one wants you to, jam content down their throat 24 hours a
Right.
day. But sometimes people do need to be reminded that you did this and they think to
Yeah.
themselves, I can't tell you how many times I've saved a podcast or saved a blog and have gone
Mm-hmm.
back to it days or weeks later to read it. Give people that
Right.
opportunity. Make sure you're presenting it on the different social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you're emailing it. There's great emails. I've seen some really clever ones from content creators where their email headline will say, like, in case you missed it, or
Right.
these are the blogs that I wrote in the last 6 months. Then it's just a little tile of all of the
Right.
different blogs that they can click on. So, don't allow yourself to lose that steam.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going and self promoting, and then don't be afraid to repurpose what's already been in existence as you start to increase readership on other areas.
Right.
You know, lead people back to some of that original content. But I would say definitely make sure your technical SEO is good, that it's
Mm-hmm.
indexed, self promote across social media, but more importantly, your email list. It's going to
That's
be your biggest one.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something I have thought about a lot too, because you run into that question of like, I want to send this article to my email list, but I've already published it out there, and maybe they've seen it, and so am I just inundating them with the same stuff? But I like that point you made about how you could say, in case you missed it, or there's probably ways you can integrate it into an email about something else or about a related topic, or even if you have an ongoing newsletter where you're kind of sharing different kind of tidbits, you can put it in there so that it seems natural and it's kind of within the flow of what you normally share with people. And like you say, it's not overdoing the self promotion, because those are some of the email lists I sometimes unsubscribe from. If it's just somebody kind of pummeling you with their sales message over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
or resharing content that you've already seen on their other channels, then it kind of becomes a question of like, okay, why am I subscribed to this email list? Yeah.
I think there is like a fine balance to strike, and you'll figure it out with data. You notice you got a lot of unsubscribes when you
Yeah.
changed one thing on your
Mm-hmm.
emails, and maybe that was not the right choice for
Right.
you, and you can make some changes moving forward. But everything needs a little bit of time to gain traction.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not getting traction within, I would say, the first couple of months, just you
Mm-hmm.
check your technical SEO, make sure that you've done
Right.
some self promotion. 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, that's where you start to say,
Yeah.
did I actually write something worth writing? And if
Hmm.
not, do I need to revisit this piece and
Right.
edit it and change the perspective? Or do I let this go and move on to my next topic?
Yeah.
Those are all the questions that, again, the answers are going to be rooted in what your goals
Hmm.
are. I know that if I'm writing about something highly technical and there's no traction for 8 to 12 months, I'm going to go back
Hmm.
to that and I'm going to say, okay, I need to maybe decrease my use of technical language. Maybe I need
Hmm.
to, bring this down a little bit more. Maybe
Right.
it's not for created tailored right for the right audience.
Hmm.
So I'm talking about this as an expert at the expert level for other experts. And maybe what I really need to be doing
Right.
is talking about it for, the layman who
Hmm.
wants to know more about this, who wants this knowledge and wants to be informed,
Yeah.
but they're just not there yet. So those are the adjustments that I would make after, all of the technical SEO and the self promotion is good.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And sometimes you can do like a cross promotion. You can kind of keep the old article as it was, but write some sort of update and then say like if you want more details, click this link and hopefully you get the click through to the other article for the people that are really interested in it. But
Yeah, yeah, that's a great idea too. I didn't think about that.
it but
And you're
it
right, like there is that way to sort of cater to both audiences. I did forget to mention was not being afraid to use your resources, like
mhm,
going out and signing up for, Haro and other
mm,
press release organizations where,
oh yeah.
they might be looking for someone who is within your niche or within the focus that you have,
Mhm.
and you get yourself some quotes, right? Like if you're in lifestyle and they're asking questions
Right.
about things that are related to lifestyle, that's a great opportunity for you to get your name somewhere.
Hmm.
And now you've built a relationship with that journalist.
Uh,
And now you can start to say, like, hey, check out this article that I read. And then maybe this journalist will share it and
hmm.
maybe start to get some traction just from that relationship. I've had a lot of success in that area where I've built relationships with journalists and they've been more than willing to share content, and then it's ended up getting more traction, and that
Yeah.
was at no cost just because I've helped them out in the past and
Right.
because that relationship was there. But then also looking for opportunities, like don't be too proud to find, smaller local news sites that are looking for an interesting blog or topic to
Yeah.
interweave into their content. There's a lot of those out there that can get you
Hmm.
backlinks. And
Right.
that's a great way to get more traffic. And a lot of people don't want to go to small locally owned news
Hmm.
places to get their content shouted out, but
Yeah.
it builds up over time and it works.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. I have not tried those before. When you look at those sites for getting quoted by journalists, is there usually a cost associated with joining those, or can you join those for free, or is there like a certain level you need to be at as a creator to get into them?
Nope, not at all. So a lot of them, like Haro, Haro,
Mm-hmm.
is free. You can sign up, and what you'll do is every day you'll get a list, and it's all
Hmm.
of the journalists across several different industries asking questions.
Hmm.
Like, I need somebody who can talk about this topic. Obviously, if you're answering, you want to make sure that
Right.
you're talking about something that you are an expert in that's related to the business that you're trying to
Yeah.
promote. But, they really oftentimes need sources for their
Hmm.
story, and they want to talk to you and they want to know like your insight, your perspective. It
Oh.
might not always get added to the story, but I would say I probably, when I was doing, was more on the content writing side. I think the data
Hmm.
was like 45, 50% success.
Right.
If I pitched a
Hmm.
journalist to be in a story,
Mm-hmm.
like I know how they want to be spoken to.
Right.
And I know that they want to make sure that they can fact check it, they can back
Mm-hmm.
it up. They want their answers clear and direct. They don't
Mm-hmm.
need to waste their time. And sometimes they want a phone interview, and that's where you can see a lot of success in that.
That's great. I'm
Yep.
gonna have to check that out. And so when it comes to social media shares and we're trying to get traffic, we talk about doing call to actions to get the click. Do you have any tips for bloggers to help improve success of their click-through rate? Because you see a lot of people sharing links on Twitter, Instagram to try and bring people to their podcast or their YouTube channel. What would you say is the key for success in actually getting the click though?
It's always going to be value add for me. How are you
Hmm.
adding value? I think that the biggest mistake, it's really hard because it really also is, again, it goes back to your goals. Because I think
Hmm.
that if your goal is to be like, I don't know, a YouTuber like Logan Paul that's just kind of
Right.
like silly. And, I know he's got some really professional qualities too, but when he got started, he was pretty silly.
Yeah.
If your goal is to be recognized for just being a big personality and being silly,
Hmm.
well, then maybe clickbait headlines are for you. But
Right.
if you're somebody who wants to be, taken pretty
Hmm.
seriously, and there's no shade in that, by the way, if
Right.
that's the niche that you're in, there's no shade,
Yeah,
because people are consuming it. So
for
obviously
sure.
they like it, right?
There's probably actually
But
a
if,
bigger market for that
yeah,
than the serious
yes,
experts.
right, right. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like if you really want to be that big personality that gets a lot
Hmm.
of attention for having that personality, then maybe those clickbaity social media promotions are
Yeah.
really going to be for you. But if you're somebody who is really trying to be taken seriously within an industry,
Hmm.
you're safety and risk mitigation expert, for example,
Yeah.
it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to really have
Hmm.
to use data. You're going to have to use testing. And when I say use data, I mean use data in your headlines and your
Right.
subtitles
Mm.
to grab their attention.
Right.
Like a new study reveals 98% of
Hmm.
XYZ happens every time. Things like that are factually correct,
Hmm.
that when the person goes from the social media post to the story that you're providing,
Right.
it's cohesive,
Hmm.
and they didn't feel like they were led
Right.
astray or they were led on. And I think making sure that you have quality images that fit the
Hmm.
different frames and that your text is not getting cut off. So making sure to test
Hmm.
everything before you publish it, which can take a little bit more time than you might
Right.
want. But it's got to think about how automatic social media is for everybody
Hmm.
now. And when you're scrolling, think about what you're paying attention to
Hmm.
and what you're not paying attention to. I
Right.
know that if something does not look a certain way for me, I'm not really interested, because
Yeah.
I'm an aesthetic person. So for me, as the part of the audience that I'm in, if the post doesn't have a certain aesthetic to it,
Hmm.
I'm not clicking through, because if they
Yeah.
couldn't pay attention to the quality of their images on their social media posts, I'm not quite sure that this is worth reading for me.
Right.
And I'm sure that I lose out on a lot of really great content, but it's just the way that it is for my particular
Yeah.
taste. So make sure you're creating the post so that it fits for the medium, whether
Hmm.
it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. Make sure that it follows within some sort of like principle, but then find your way to differentiate yourself
Right.
from the feed. Make sure that as you're scrolling, there's some sort of attention grabbing thing happening at the same time.
I love that point
So,
because I think sometimes there's a disconnect with creators that will, like you say, they'll have more of an expertise type focus, but they think, oh, the way to get the click is to use all of those devices from, the clickbait type headlines, like you won't believe this, or,
mm-hmm.
amazing facts about whatever. And for that type of audience, that type of clickbait headline might not resonate. So you really have to, as you've been saying, like think back to like what's the audience and what will they value,
Yeah,
I
where are
guess.
their watering holes,
Yeah.
right? Like, where are they spending their time? What are they
Right.
reading? Because if you understand where their watering holes are, like where
Hmm.
they're sourcing their information, where they spend their time,
Right.
then you can start to speak to them in that
Hmm.
same tone. You can start to bring them the same thing that's
Right.
with your own twist. Not the same thing, but you know
Hmm.
what I mean, like something
Yeah.
that's congruent with their nature. So it's
Right.
kind of like just in like it's something that would be on their radar, but they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I want
Hmm.
to read that. But that's only going to happen if you know what things normally grab your audience's attention
Yeah.
and how you can tailor your content to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so let's say we start to do those things and we get to have people come to our site. What's the keys to really building a relationship with the audience now that
Not
they're
spamming
visiting?
them. Don't have and I would say make sure that you don't have any invasive pop-ups first.
Right.
Slide
I
in call to actions or email subscriptions. The drop off rate for when there is a pop up, like sign up for emails or log in to see
right.
this or anything like that, the
Mm-hmm.
drop off is huge. Slide in CTAs and slide in subscriptions are great, but be creative too. I think some of the best subscription slide in call to action I've seen is like, want more of this?
Right.
And then it's just a space for their email. Like,
Yeah.
don't, not wasting a whole lot of time with too much text, like just
Mm-hmm.
asking, hey, you want more?
Yeah.
I'll give you more. Let me know. And then you can see, like, okay, I had like 30 people sign up on this blog post. What
Right.
did I do in this particular blog post that
Mm-hmm.
grabbed that much attention? Whereas on all of my others, I only had eight,
Yeah.
right? What did I do different? That's how you can start to think. You can start to really pay attention to that data. Like,
Right.
why was that blog post different? And it could be so many reasons. That's going to take you
Mm-hmm.
another 6 to 12 months to figure out.
Yes.
This is a long haul, and content is a long game. Um, but
Yeah.
it's just paying attention there. So I would say build a relationship by getting email subscriptions,
Mm-hmm.
giving them more of what they want, what they're interested
Yeah.
in. So if you're seeing success in one niche, really put more of your energy into that
Mm-hmm.
niche versus trying to force something that isn't working on your site. And then I think, ooh, I really do think it has so much to do with quality. What are you providing? Is it
Right.
quality? Are you proud of it? Are you paying attention? You know,
Mm-hmm.
when people do unsubscribe, are you
Right.
paying attention to where they're unsubscribing? You know, like we've seen email lists have 8% open rates, and we've
Right.
gone in and paid attention to, okay, why are these open rates so bad? And we start to realize, like, okay, well, let's maybe tone back how often we're sending. Maybe
Right.
let's look at these headlines. Okay, the ones with the lower open rates had this type of headline that was just like
Mm-hmm.
an announcement of new blog posts.
Right.
But these ones that asked a question and engaged the user,
Mm-hmm.
they had an open rate of 11%. Let's give them more of that. And then by the end of, 6 to 8 months, now all of a sudden we've got a
Yeah.
20% open rate average on our email list because we've paid attention to these really tiny,
Right.
minute details that just almost kind of like subtly or subconsciously let your
Mm-hmm.
your audience know that you're paying attention, you're listening to them, you
Yeah.
value their time
Mm-hmm.
because you should. Because if they're spending 10 minutes reading something that you wrote, that is
Right.
10 minutes that they could be spending doing anything else. So
Yeah.
value that time and give them more of that. And I think that
Yeah.
that's how you'll build a relationship.
Yeah, it really it comes down to trust. Like you have to build that trust with your audience that they're going to get content about that thing that you're known for or becoming known for, and then at a certain level of quality. I can think of a lot of creators that I follow. That's why I follow them, right? Is because I know if I go to their posts or their blogs, I'm going to get value from it and it's going to be relevant to me. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And trust online is like a really fickle thing that's hard to figure out, right?
All right.
Because you don't have somebody, you're not in a room with someone saying like, um, what feedback can I have on the 15-minute presentation that I just gave you? Are
All
there
right.
anything that you wish I would have given you more of? Do you wish I would have talked about less
Yeah.
about these things? You're not getting that. You don't have that opportunity. It's that crickets
Yeah.
that you were kind of talking about. And that can be really hard to work with.
Hmm.
So you really have to be willing to get nitty gritty with those little details of,
Right.
okay, I sent out 10 emails in the last 3 months. Which ones had the highest open rate?
Mhm.
And study that and ask yourself why you think that is. Why did your audience care about that email more than they cared about the others nine that you sent? And start to dissect your own work that way, and make sure to take breaks from doing that too.
For
Because
sure.
it can be thankless work to try to please an audience or a room over and over and over again. Like, don't lose yourself,
It
but
is.
pay attention
Yeah.
to the data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I can see like how that momentum can build. I was going over my YouTube data recently and seeing, okay, people like the videos about photography and social media strategy. And then there's some other videos out there that haven't performed as well. So by focusing more on the stuff that has done well, you can see how that can snowball over time with a blog or with your YouTube channel, podcast, any kind of content, right? But I do think sometimes about that balance between doing what's working and then continuing to experiment, because as a creator, you have an interest in doing different things. You also want to keep things fresh. I think sometimes about the danger of doing the same thing too much, even if it's working for a time. Will there be that point where people get bored of it, or it's like, okay, that's another post about that, and I've kind of heard that from that person. Do you think about a percentage, like in terms of like, okay, we're going to do 80% of what works, and with 20% of the content we'll experiment? Like, how do you approach it when you think about that?
It's a great question. I love 80/20 rules, honestly. I think that
Mhm.
80/20 is how I live pretty much in general. So I
Yeah,
do tend to like lean towards, you know, 80, eat healthy 80% of the time, 20% of the time have fun,
yeah.
right? Like those kinds of things. Make sure that you're hitting 80% of your
Yeah,
workouts and 20% of
right.
taking a break. Same thing with, yeah, with content creation, but you might have to divide it a little more based on, again, on your audience, your
Hmm.
goals, your data. How much can you afford to experiment as a
Yeah,
creator? How much time do you have
right.
to experiment? And just 20%, is that enough? Is it
Hmm.
enough to keep you interested in what you're doing? Is it
Right.
enough to generate the traffic that you need to
Hmm.
continue doing it? Because I think that as we're having this conversation, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it from like, okay, I do actually remember, you know, being not in more of like a management space with content creation, but being an
Right.
actual creator, and almost kind of at times feeling dehumanized because I was always trying to
Right.
just give the people what they wanted, right?
Right.
And sometimes that doesn't speak to you. So I think you have to find that balance of like, what do I need for myself to continue doing this
Hmm.
and to continue enjoying doing this? What are my goals? How much can I afford to be doing this in terms of time? Because time costs, however you want to think about it,
Right.
investment. So 80/20 would be where I would lean towards, but I think that it's always going to depend on your business goals and your data. So if you're looking to, if like you have, let's say 100, you have 100 subscribers on your email list or your blog,
Mm.
and they're consistent readers. Every month, these 100 people show up. Maybe 80% of them are here for the largest generator of traffic for your
Right.
website, the revenue generator. You want to make sure that they don't go anywhere.
Mm.
So make sure you're giving them, all right, what do they want? What do they need to keep coming back? And then these other 20 people, or other 20%,
Mm.
are not just reading that content, but they're also actually really into this experimental content that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can find more people like that and you can start to
Hmm.
shift your percentages. So now maybe when you've doubled to having 200 subscribers,
Right.
now maybe, 140 of them are only there for what was originally that 80%.
Right.
And now you've shifted your numbers and you're allowed to have more of that room for experimentation because you've diversified your audience. You've
Yeah.
found people who want you to talk about a few different things because they're here for your tone of voice. They're
Right.
here for the way that you write and how you talk about topics. So they're kind of giving you that room now to speak about it the way that you want to versus having to be within the strict constraints of what that
Hmm.
initial 80% was giving you when you were just getting traction.
It comes down to that balance again, I guess, between like you say, like the business goals and the creative side, and like where do you land, and what's the purpose of your content. And so how do we measure our success then? Are there benchmarks that we can use to tell if we're winning or not in the content game?
Man, that is so highly specific. Like, so it really varies by client for us, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm at an agency now. I'm overseeing, content production for 20 different clients
Hmm.
across different industries. And what success means to each of them is different. At the end of the day, I mean, you'd be amazed at how much content is written that is successful by like our metrics and is driving
Right.
the results, but the only reason why the client really cares about that content is because it got them the phone calls, but
Right.
they don't really care what the content says because they
Right.
haven't read it themselves. To me, I'm like, if the client isn't reading it, that's a little
Yeah.
bit of a failure to me. I want them to be reading
Right.
it and to be proud of it.
Hmm.
So yeah, the phone's ringing and it's having success in the number portion of it, and they love it for that reason,
Right.
but they didn't read it. They weren't interested in reading it, and I'm like, dang, like okay.
Yeah.
So I have to go client by client.
Hmm.
And I focus on, okay, what is your main metric? What is your main goal? What do you want this to do for you as I'm
Yeah.
content writing? Are you looking for brand awareness? You're trying to change
Hmm.
the tone and the voice of your brand so that you can be perceived a different way, because
Right.
a lot of home services companies are, older family owned companies who
Hmm.
haven't really had to ever think about branding before because they
Right.
were, the mom and pop from the block. But now with
Hmm.
the internet, they have to pivot a little bit and
Right.
make some changes. So maybe a lot of their content focus and their rebranding is being done through that perspective. So what they want
Hmm.
is they want people within their community to recognize their new brand, and
Right.
that's what we focus the content on. Then we have clients who have never used an SEO company before,
Hmm.
and they've been one of the biggest players in the game in their territory for a really long time. But now, for some reason, this brand new company is coming in and kicking them off the first
Right.
page at every turn. And they've noticed, like, oh my God, we used to have 249 average phone calls per month. And now we're only getting 129. Like, we
Hmm.
have got to do something. And that's the goal and the metric for that client. So
Right.
it's, are the phones ringing? Are we getting that number back up through content creation?
Yeah.
So it really is just going to be so highly specific. And then the goals that I set for myself
Hmm.
are, a little different even than the client goals. Like, I want every piece of content that goes out to say, like, yeah, like our team did this. And to me, when a client isn't reading it, I'm like, all right, that's not a win. If they didn't read it, that's not a win. I'm on a client call and I'm like, hey, so we published this piece. We got you mentioned in Forbes last month. Did you read it? And they were like, no, I'm too busy. I'm like, dang. All right.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right.
I guess
Well,
it's different with someone building a personal brand, right? And they're so closely tied to what they're producing, and then that's their measure is, how many people did it get out to. But sometimes it's to the detriment of the creator because then they focus on like, okay, how many impressions did that last post get? And they're not even thinking enough about, okay, did I get email signups? Am I, really building the brand, or did I just, follow a trend that happened to get seen a lot? But that's not really success in the larger sense in terms of what their long-term goals are.
it can be, not that this is turning into a content creator therapy session, but I will say that it can feel like thankless work
Yeah.
because you're working for a silent audience, and that is really challenging.
Hmm.
And you really have to know who you are if you're going to
Yeah.
be a content creator and you're going to do it well. You have to know who you are and you have to be proud of yourself
Hmm.
separate from all of the content that you create.
Right.
Because if you root all of your self worth and your value in your viewership,
Hmm.
your readership, your shares, your clout, it's going to be hard for you. Success is going to be hard for you.
Yeah.
Especially, you see it especially in the travel industry, because the
Hmm.
travel industry where creators can just get really, really down on themselves
Hmm.
over time because they're in such a saturated space where they feel like they're not getting the
Right.
traction. And it takes a while for them to figure out what works for them. But you often see like the ego take a big hit and the
Yeah.
confidence kind of just start to go down, and they start to lose the reason why behind why they wanted to start doing
Right.
this in the first place. And I hate seeing that. So make sure you're paying attention to that.
Hmm.
I'm very numbers, like I'm very in the numbers right now, but it's
Hmm.
really easy to think about that number, right?
Right.
And last month you had 180 people came to this blog post, and
Right.
this next blog post this month only 151 people came.
Right.
And sure, it was only a 28-day month, and I
Yeah.
only promoted it in 3 out of 5 places so far, but I just felt like I should have this number. And then you're
Yeah.
focused on this number, and it starts to detract you away from what your
Right.
original goal was. It starts to take you out of, doing what you love for the right reasons, of creating
Yeah.
content for the right reasons. So you have to be careful. Did you watch the free diving documentary on Netflix by
I
any
haven't
chance, The
seen
Deepest
that.
Breath?
No.
Okay. So I'm a free diver, so I'm like,
Okay.
love, love, love the sport. I can kind of draw a parallel here
Yeah.
based on this if you ever do get the opportunity to watch it. A lot of people in the freediving community
Hmm.
get really focused on numbers because you are
Right.
following a linear progression as you are diving. So if you know that yesterday you dove 100 meters,
Hmm.
which I never do, by the way, I'm not that type of free diver. Like yesterday you dove 100 meters,
Right.
right? And then tomorrow you want to dive 100. You get so caught up on
Right.
making 101 happen that you put yourself at risk.
Yeah.
And because you're not actually stopping to think about your safety divers, can they hit 101 today? You're not thinking about, are you physically capable and prepared of doing this? Because you're so
Right.
focused on the numbers, you're putting everything else aside. And I think content creators can fall into that same thing where you're so focused on the data and you're so focused on the numbers
Right.
that you maybe forget about the audience a little bit.
Yeah.
You forget about the people and what's bringing you there. You're forgetting about your passions and the
Right.
reasons why you're invested in writing about these topics anyway. And once you start to lose those things and you start to only focus on the numbers, you can
Right.
really start to define success in ways that I think are detrimental.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Because there's so many things that will affect, how well a post does or an episode or anything, right? You can't control it. And so you can't put too much stock into what happens. And that's a great point about like thinking back about, what's your why? And then I try to think sometimes too about like you're saying, was I proud of the piece? Like regardless of how it did, was I happy with what I put together? And think about what you learned through the process of doing it too, and how that'll help in the future.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Always and just be a student
Hmm.
and and just stay engaged and care about what you do. I really do think I'm a believer that there's enough for everyone. So
Right.
even though everything is really saturated, I think that if you really do stay focused on things for the right reasons and you're invested in figuring out what works in healthy ways and also in
Right.
gaining self-awareness, then you will be successful as a
Yeah.
person, regardless of your field, but especially in content
For
creation.
sure. And then thinking about impact too, because even if your post or what have you, if it impacts 3 people or 5 people in a way that's kind of a great thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Ex- exactly. Like, I think that's another huge one. Again, I saw a lot in travel where you had a lot of people talking about parts of destinations that
Hmm.
major destinations, but parts that people have maybe never heard of or never
Right.
seen or never knew they had the opportunity to visit before. And now you've opened the world up
Right.
to, a handful of people. And maybe it's not as many people as you wanted,
Mm-hmm.
but you still had an impact on a small group and you still got them to see a new part of the world
Mm-hmm.
in a new way, experience a new culture, maybe make friends depending
Mm-hmm.
on, what it is that you're talking about and selling. And I just think that's one of the best things about content creation.
Yeah.
So I don't think any number is too small with that.
That's great. And then, speaking of all that, how do you avoid burnout as a creator, like with all that comes with it?
That's so funny. So yeah, that was really hard for me for a long time. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a personal brand creator as much as
Mm-hmm.
I am. Like I work with people who are
Right.
developing personal brands, right? So it's a lot of influencer marketing campaigns, worked with a lot of influencers, worked with a lot of different people across different industries.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been an in-house creator
Yeah.
and I have both made demands of in-house creators
Mm-hmm.
that led to burnout, and I have both experienced demands
All
that
right.
have led to burnout. So, working in partnership with influencers, I would say that if you are looking to grow a personal brand and you are looking into influencer marketing, be extremely protective of your time and demand value for what you are asking for. If they're not willing to meet your pricing and your pricing is reasonable, like you understand, again, we talk about self
Right.
awareness, you have to have some self awareness.
Yeah.
If you are getting new to the game and you're still figuring things out and you don't have the experience, well, you need to kind of figure out what are your competitors who are in your same
Right.
experience level charging. Maybe you can charge a little bit more than that for your own reasons. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
charge a little bit less, but have the self awareness. Don't say that one three
Right.
TikTok series is $25,000 and you've never had a client before. Like that's
Because
not
it's
good
gonna
self
be
awareness.
it's gonna be a great brand someday.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's like you have to strike that balance, but I do think you should always demand to be paid for your
Hmm.
time because you need to protect your time. If
Yeah.
you are giving away your TikTok videos or your blogs, your
Right.
guest blogs and things like that for, $100 and it took you 8 hours to write it, like
Yeah.
no,
It's
don't
not
do that. You got to protect your time or else you're going to have to do 16 more of those blogs
right.
to be able to, keep your lights on this month.
Yeah.
And like you're asking to burn out at that point.
Right.
So boundaries, know your worth, demand to be paid for that. I would say before going into partnership with any brands, before accepting any marketing dollars, painstakingly look through that contract. And if
Hmm.
you don't, I don't know at what point you might be, but some, creators have managers. If you're at a point where,
Right.
you have a lot of brand deals coming in, get a manager, get somebody who knows how to negotiate contracts,
Hmm.
who knows how to look at the details of the contract so that they can help protect your time
Right.
and make sure that you are generating enough revenue and also having enough rest time. Because if you're a writer, you cannot write if you do not rest.
Yeah. Yeah,
You have to
absolutely.
play. You have to do nothing. You have to have time to just be sitting. All writers do that. We're just in our heads. We're
Right.
just, right? And we just translate it onto paper.
Yeah.
If you don't have time to stop and let yourself kind of speak to yourself,
Mm.
enjoy the world around you and all of those things, you're not going to be able to write, at
Yeah.
least not well.
Yeah,
You have
absolutely. See that happening with creators sometimes because they're in a way, self-motivated and self-managed, and sometimes for the particularly ambitious ones, it leads them into that direction of they're just doing too much, right? And it's can't.
to.
How do you keep sustaining it? And often the best work does come from that period where there's a little bit of pressure, but not so much that it's getting in the way of what you need to do, right?
Completely agree. I think there's a lot of people operate that way where that little bit of pressure is really, really necessary for them to be able to
Mm-hmm.
perform. But if you sign up for too many, you've taken on too much and your deadlines are all,
Yeah.
scattered throughout the quarter and you've taken on too much and you've gotten behind in one area, maybe there was a misunderstanding, there was a misalignment, there
Right.
wasn't enough conversation with the brand or whoever it is that
Mm-hmm.
you're writing for. And now you think to yourself, or even if you're just writing for yourself and you've set up interviews
Right.
and you've set up, needing to talk to other people, there might be a point where you get a little bit behind in one area and now all of a sudden you're so far behind that you have to push through it
Right.
for an unbelievable rate, working too many hours in a
Mm-hmm.
day. So you have to schedule things effectively, make sure you're charging enough and being realistic and all of those things and making time.
Yeah.
If you're a manager and you or a editorial, you're doing editorial work or content management, you also need to be realistic. Like you
Right.
need to understand that oftentimes if you're working for an agency or for a magazine or anyone, you're running a publication of any
Mm-hmm.
sort with strict deadlines, you need to both be realistic around your deadlines
Yeah.
and how much people can actually take on. And you need
Right.
to know when to hire new people. Way too many writers are expected to write too much, especially now that we have AI assisted technology,
Right.
AI assisted writing. Like a lot of writers are being expected to crank out so much. And I, when I've had some consulting experiences where they've asked me, we can't keep writers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's the tenure? And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
12 to 24 months, but we can't get a writer to stay past two
Right.
years. And I'm like, well, what's their schedule look like?
Yeah.
And you look at their schedule and it is just day after day, assignment due, just nonstop,
Yeah.
just assignments. There's not a single week in the calendar year that the writers aren't scheduled
Right.
for nothing. You need to give them time. Like, even though they're on the clock
Right.
and they're providing value, writers need time to think
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
not, they can't just be writing all of the time. So, if you have an editorial calendar that is consistent, then you need to make sure you have enough people. You need to have
Yeah.
freelancers on, on call in
Mm-hmm.
case life happens and writers are sick or,
Right.
they have a family emergency. Don't but don't move the deadline and expect them to cover it, outsource it.
Yeah.
Because they've got to come back now and they've got to get back to the deadlines that are
Right.
preset for that following week. So I think from the management perspective, it's being realistic and having self-awareness around when you're overworking people, which is common,
Yeah.
especially with creatives. Like creatives are just, man, they are just, we just grind them. But as a creator, I think it's a lot of it is just charging and
Yeah.
self-awareness and experience.
And bring in help when you need it too. And I think your
Yes.
organization, helps creators. Could you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have guest blogging opportunities. We are in the process of a rebrand. So we are looking for guest bloggers to come in and talk about really anything related to SEO writing. In
Right.
2024, we're looking to make this launch. We want to make sure that we are talking about things at a high level,
Mm.
that we're not talking about things that have been exhausted
Right.
by people in the industry who have maybe bigger names or more experience than we
Hmm.
have. What we really want is people who can come in and talk about things with their unique perspective. So we offer both paid and internship blog opportunities. We're going to be launching an internship program this year for SEO writing.
Okay.
So hopefully that will come in the middle of 2024 is what we're slated for. But we're looking to work with creators who are interested in learning, who
Yeah.
have good writing
Hmm.
technique, have a good process in place, know how to write really well, but
Right.
are interested in learning a little bit more about the SEO side of things. So
Hmm.
we're looking into paid internships for that.
That's
So
great. Is
hopefully that will be in the latter of 2024.
is it like an industry kind of industry information website?
So we focus on home services and we focus
Okay.
on providing people in home services with knowledge about SEO. So we want to be able to really help people contextualize
Hmm.
how content writing and marketing can really help their brand because especially in home services you have a lot of people who the reason they became a master plumber is because they never wanted to sit at a desk. So
Right.
when they, are in upper management and now they realize they have to hire a marketing company, they're so upset about
Yeah.
it. like they never wanted to do this part of it. So and we have to connect them and help them see the value in it and give them their freedom back too.
Yeah.
Like it let you go, you want to be in the field, go be in the field. We'll do this part for you. So
Yeah.
so that's what we do a lot on our on with our content.
I'm sure they're glad to have you help take that off their plate.
Yeah, a lot of them are. A lot of them are like, this is exactly why we hire you.
That's
Like as we have people who have to like go in and fix things with Google My Business or,
mhm.
really highly technical tasks that it's not that it's necessarily really that you have to have an insane amount of knowledge, but
Right.
sometimes it's just the fact that you can take the time that sitting at a computer and facing a problem doesn't make you want to like flip your desk.
Yeah.
Whereas there's people who are like, I absolutely cannot. But let me tell you something. If I had a leaky pipe and I had to mess with that with a wrench for an hour and a half, I'd be flipping my sink. It is no different. It's just I think a way for us
Yeah.
to kind of come together and help each other. So
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today and sharing your experience.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a great chat.
So, I've been thinking a lot about the question of strategic alignment and what does strategic alignment look like in terms of efficiency and interests. Let's talk about efficiency first because we really need that as creators, especially if you're doing this part time. But first, I want to give a shout out to Jay Klaus, who helped me to recognize the two main pathways for growing a social media brand writing and video. So, first up, we've got blogging, which is a writing format can be easily redistributed on sites such as X as threads, on Instagram as carousels, and on other blogging sites such as Medium. Next up, we've got long form video content, which can be easily carved up and repurposed as Instagram Reels, TikToks, or as YouTube Shorts. So, from a format perspective, you can really start to see the efficiency gains there by sticking with the same type of format consistently. And yes, there are some tools out there that can make it a little easier to repurpose across platforms and formats. But as someone who's done this a lot over the last year, trust me when I say it's still less efficient. Because in addition to the format differences, on the one hand, you've got tools, resources, and best practices that go with blogging. And then you've got a whole other set of tools, resources, and best practices that goes with video content production. And it's actually really hard to stay current in all of those areas at the same time. In addition to which, we haven't even talked about the challenge of managing engagement across multiple platforms. Because if you're just posting on all those platforms and then leaving, you're not going to grow those platforms. So, as Jay says, as a small creator, unless you got a big team supporting you, the best thing we can do is pick a lane. Pick a lane in terms of a format, and then pick a lane in terms of a main growth platform. And then I want to emphasize that point that both Jay and Amanda have made about using that main growth platform to cement your relationship with your audience via relationship platforms such as email list, podcast, or private community. And then what that's going to do is going to help to deepen your relationship with your existing audience. It's going to enhance your monetization potential, and it's going to build an independence from those third-party platforms where, as we know, things can change very quickly, and an advantage that we have there at one point can suddenly dissipate. And as creators, we need some kind of insurance against that. And that brings us to the second element of strategic alignment, which is your interests. What type of content are you most interested in creating? Because success as a creator for most of us is going to be a long-term game. And if you can't get excited about what you're doing and stay excited about it over a long period of time, I don't know how you can be successful at this. And so for me, you may have noticed that I've been leaning a lot more into video content lately. And that's partly because I've been having a lot more success in generating reach via video. Also, personally, I just enjoy making video content a little more rather than writing, perhaps because I've done so much writing. And with video content, you're actually out there and you're doing stuff. The other thing I realized about blogging was that there's a lot more to it than just the creation of the original post. There's the technical CEO aspect that Amanda talked about. There's the fact that links get broken and you have to go back and update them, or that things change and the information goes out of date. So you got to update the post to keep it relevant. From what I've seen, this doesn't happen as much with video content. For one thing, you're going to have fewer links to look after in general as compared to a blog. And even in cases where those links might get broken, there doesn't seem to be the same kind of CEO penalty as you would have with a blog if it has a bunch of broken links in it. Plus, with video content, the audience doesn't really have the same expectation that the content is being continually refreshed. It was recorded on a particular date, and that's it. Pretty much one and done. Now, I don't mean to imply that blogging isn't a viable strategy. It still has all of that potential that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. And if you can develop your skill as a writer, there's a lot of places where good writing is in demand. This is more a question of picking that lane because, as we've said before on this show, there are lots of different pathways that you can take to be successful as a creator. It's just that you can't take all of them at the same time. You've got to pick a strategy and stick with it for a while. And then once you got the resources, you can always build a team that can help you do more. And you can bring in help from an outside company like Regex SEO, the one that Amanda works with, and they can help you with all those things like SEO, social media marketing, email marketing, all those multiple channels that we've talked about. But you got to be in the position to do that resource-wise. So what do you think? Which lane are you going to pick as a creator? Let me know in the comments and let me know why you picked that lane. I'll be interested to see what the discussion is there. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button. Maybe check out one of these other episodes right here. And thanks for watching. Until next time, we'll see you in the next episode.